Look, Lauren, governance and responsible usage of AI is probably a bigger topic than AI itself because there's so much implication in terms of what happens to humanity.
A lot of organizations, they don't really realize not only the extent of the severe implications that something potentially dangerous could have, but they don't really understand how big their AI footprint is. I mean, you use the term like the shadow AI problem. You mentioned that most organizations themselves, they have a larger AI footprint than they actually realize.
Sure.
So how does a leader map what they can't see? I think in that respect, sometimes the question then comes in, and it's a question for what we're talking about the responsible use of AI. Is now even too late? So welcome back to Convergence. Today we're diving into a story that really does sound like it was ripped straight from a science fiction thriller, but it is actually our new reality. And we see more and more of this developing every single day. When we access our phones, we scroll through news articles, we looked at LinkedIn, we go wherever we get our actual news from, and we're a little bit shocked, I would say. One thing that we're focusing on today is that Anthropic developed an AI, and AI is always an interesting classification, and AI is so powerful. It was dubbed Claude Mythos, that they deemed it too dangerous for public release. It's a model that can find security vulnerabilities faster than we can actually patch them. Now, joining me to discuss how we navigate this new frontier is, as always, my co-host Faisal Hawk. Hi, Faisal.
Hi, Lauren.
And what we're going to do is we're going to move past this honeymoon phase of AI and really enter into the governance phase, because this is where we are. We're at the phase of governance. So today, Faisal, we're going to be breaking down the 90-day blueprint that you actually built. And this is to make sure that individuals and organizations, that they can build a responsible AI framework, one that doesn't just check a compliance box like a lot of regulatory and responsible frameworks tend to do, but actually protects people, their reputations, and their bottom lines. So I would say, why don't we dive into this topic, Faisal?
Sure. Look, Lauren, governance and responsible usage of AI is probably a bigger topic than AI itself because there's so much implication in terms of what happens to humanity, in terms of, like their economic realities, the social realities, the utilization of AI for total destruction in terms of war situations. So responsible usage of AI is a very important topic, and some people are taking it very seriously, some people are not. And, so there are a lot of doom and gloom conversation around it. What we try to do is create a foundational roadmap that can jumpstart people on creation of governance model that drives the responsible uses of AI. So we looked at it from an ethical foundation point of view. We looked at it from accountability and oversight point of view. And then we looked at it from a human impact in terms of, we're talking about people losing identity, people losing job, people are being targeted, from privacy and utilization of AI in war situations, geopolitical situations. So we looked at it from that point of view, and we came up with a 90-day plan, jumpstart any organization for the foundational element. Governance of AI doesn't end with that foundation, it actually begins with that foundation.
It's certainly a component and a compass element when we're looking at governance and responsible AI. I think that where we stand, it's more laying a foundation that companies and organizations can certainly develop as models develop and AI develops in an enterprise context. So what I want to do, first of all, is what's interesting, like governance and responsibility, like governance, responsible AI. Do you think that you can't have governance if you're not responsible? Like, do you have to be responsible And then also the question of what is responsible in terms of making sure that you have governance to be able to have a responsible AI framework. Anyways, that's not the question. It's just thoughts in my head.
Sure.
So we started as well, and you started the article that was in Fast Company, the one, here's how to jumpstart your company's responsible AI governance in 90 days. We were talking about the sort of mythos precedent. So Anthropic kept Claude Mythos behind closed doors. And I think that we have to ask ourselves, Faisal, as well. So in the era of open AI, effectively, or can we say that this is over for high tier models because the risks are now too high? Claude Mythos, it was behind closed doors, and it does stem from its ability to autonomously discover and exploit thousands of zero-day security vulnerabilities in major operating systems and web browsers. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, right after that story broke out, there was a follow-up story where somebody or some group actually was able to get into Mythos by predicting or, playing with a lot of different URL that leads to the Mythos. So the question is not about just can you put boundaries around Mythos. Fundamental question you have to ask yourself is that what's the ethical responsibility to even build things like that? That's going to have a huge implication. Like, when you and I over the last year talked about, do we really need humanoid robots that's going to replace everything that anybody can do? I mean, you have to really go into the purpose of why we're doing this. It has to start with why. I mean, are we so desperate to completely replace ourselves to create a new world, and that's going to benefit quote unquote who is the bigger question than anything else, right? So that's where responsible AI usage begins. So it's a creation of, there's a many category of AI players in the sense that people who are creating the models, people who are using it, and people who are consuming it, right? So there's responsibility on the creators, responsibility on the people who are actually deploying it, and then people who are consuming it. So all of us has responsibility. And then when you talk about governance versus responsible usage, governance could be compliance, as you know, right? I mean, it could be a financial or regulatory checkpoint that you use. That's not really responsible. That's not what makes people responsible. That just, you're saying you're adhering to XYZ. But obviously you need that so that you can hold people legally liable when they're doing wrong. But, we're in such a strange place because none of those things are actually in place to think, act, and hold people accountable for any of these things that are going on. And there's divergent viewpoint depending on where you come from. As you said, EU has one act, US has another act, Chinese have another act, and these are all major players for driving AI development.
I think there's a couple of elements in there. So we've got the ethical foundations, but again, we go back to the conversation around it's those that are actually developing the models or developing the AI applications that should keep this ethical principle and development necessity at the core of what they're doing. Because you know yourself that once it is in the wild per se, it can very easily be recalled because there is exposure and liabilities, and it's very difficult to bring that back into a space of containment. So I would say that this is what is suggesting that, for high tier models, like the one that we're talking about with the potential to really turn like computers into a whole crime scene, that the sort of era of unrestricted public release, this is being essentially replaced by security alliances and controlled partnerships. And you ask, like, what's the purpose? Why are we doing it? Like, why are we developing this? Is it to replace humans? But I think it's just as well, like anything, that once something has been developed, it's very difficult to take a step back.
Of course.
Going on to the next point that you highlight as well in the Jumpstart, Faisal. So a lot of organizations, they don't really realize not only the extent of the severe implications that something potentially dangerous could have, but they don't really understand how big their AI footprint is. And you talk about this. I mean, you use the term like the shadow AI problem. You sort of mentioned that most organizations themselves, they have a larger AI footprint than they actually realize.
Sure.
So how does a leader map what they can't see? Because that's also a component of responsible AI, is also knowing how are people implementing and using AI in an organization. That must be quite difficult. Is that part of the responsible AI plan?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, and let's get into very practical element of this 90-day plan, right? So what we can look at it, okay, first 30 days is mapping because, and I'll address the shadow element of it in a second. Next, 30 days could be building how you want to build your guardrail. And the last element of it is that how do you embed that so it becomes self-sustaining, right? So when we're talking about mapping, this is where you have to really start thinking about the worst case scenario. What's the worst case scenario? And map your AI landscape whereby it's like unsanctioned usage of AI. Because AI is so accessible, many employees are using it without even knowing it, right? Or many organizations actually knowing it, right? People are loading up documents, people are creating test scenarios using some generative AI and loading it up on their application. There's a shadow usage that's going on in every organization that most people are not even realizing. So first thing is actually map where it's being used and what's the right usage of AI, right? So that's one. Second is that you have to force the conversation in terms of worst case scenario, right? I mean, you have, remember in care framework, we talked about this step called catastrophizing step, where we say, okay, like, Mythos, there's the catastrophic scenario. You can imagine the catastrophic scenario in Mythos, right? So, and then you have to triage it, just like you see in like a ER environment, there's a triage because it's high risk and you have to act upon it. Like a similar thing, you have to triage it. And then you got to go into okay, where things are, I know where the culture is, then I have to get into the governance model.
So just to summarize what you've said as well, you've got this dedicated 30-day map plan where leaders are essentially, there's an inventory of every system, including shadow use of unsanctioned tools by employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have to have a policy. It just like, remember when a lot of organization put before AI, and especially you see this in government usage, right? You can't just take your laptop and hook up to any network and download any application and use it, whatever. And because we all use now personal devices, the organization doesn't keep a tap on what people are using and not using, right? So you got to build a policy around what's being used and why it's being used and where the corporate data and other things that are being loaded and being utilized. Because if you don't do that, you're basically exposing yourself.
I think in that respect, sometimes the question then comes in, and it's a question for what we're talking about, the responsible use of AI. Is now even too late? I have seen as well in practice in talking to different institutions when we're doing maybe an exploratory call about possible use cases as to what might fit their organization best. And also from a competitive analysis perspective of maybe they're using one tool, but they want to look at another tool and see how that benefits their workflow better, depending on their actual end goals. But a lot of the time you hear that they're already using tools that might not necessarily provide that responsible AI fundament and also responsible practices of AI. So that's also a consideration of, is the education also part of a responsible AI plan? Because if you don't know, and there's always that ignorance is bliss, and one can plead ignorance to the sense that, well, I don't know exactly what is being fed to the LLM, and I'm sure I turned off all of the training buttons to protect my data.
It's like anything else, right? You have to have a policy Once you develop the policy, you have to educate your audience, right, which is the employees or whatever the case may be. And then you have to enforce the policy, right? If you want to experiment, that experimentation should be done in a sandbox. And you have to have a clear way of defining where that sandbox is and how it's being experimented. Policy, is nothing if nobody knows what the policies are. So if your employee pool doesn't know what they should and should not be doing, then the policy is useless. It's like, think about this: drug abuse, alcohol abuse, employee harassment. These are all policy, right? Unethical behavior, money laundering, right? These are all crimes. You also have to look at this as a abuse of technology and hold it in the same kind of a category, and people has to be trained on it. And things are moving so fast. The reason you're saying that you're already seeing that, is it too late? Is because we haven't paid attention to that while we've been too busy being enamored or busy building things without being actually, thinking through what it is and what it is not, and what, how it should be, the guardrails should be established and maintained. So from that point of view, education is a huge part of it, but you have to craft a policy. What are you educating them on, right? You
Yeah,
can't be
sure,
saying that,
sure.
you can't just use ChatGPT to every time you want to do something. That's not a policy. You have to have a clear policy guideline.
Okay. So maybe some practical tips as well. To see the invisible, I think that organizations must implement technical monitoring, as you have outlined, put in place data collection processes that track what AI systems are actually doing. They also need to establish traceability. A lot of companies, not only in their own practices and processes, but vendors as well, traceability in all elements of AI should be first and foremost and extremely visible. So this sort of requires a software bill of materials, audit logs to provide improved compliance and visibility into their data lineage. I think as well, you've got this element of building relationship cadences, where you can engage directly in your organization with technical leads. So business users and technical leads are actually synergizing more so that they can identify immediate gaps and spread this across the organization in alignment maybe with policies. And to see, as you've said, that maybe there is missing documentation. I'm sure that not a lot of organizations are at the stage where they have the policies in place so that this can be ushered in a more positive direction.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a element of, philosophical, there is an element of physical, and there is an element of logical structure that has to be established. And at the end of the day, that has to be embedded into the culture of the organization, right? And you have to have an exit plan where thing goes down wrong. You have to be able to pull it out, right? So, and this embedded governance needs to be part of your operational model, not just in your lip service or, education is education and policy is policy. But then once it goes into like a building into the system infrastructure from architectural point of view, and then regular audit trail and tracking and monitoring, that's how it becomes operationalized governance, right? So, and the 90-day plan, when we talked about the 90-day plan, that's just the foundational element that has to be iterated every quarter and refreshed every quarter as technology are changing and as you're using more and more stuff. If you don't do that, then you're doing a disservice to yourself, but you're also doing disservice to what we started talking about, what is responsible AI means. That is it the impact of humanity? Is it impact on the environment? Is it impact on your employees, whatever the case may be? So you have to almost create a sort of an index of responsible AI for yourself and then measure it against that.
So one thing that you've also pushed forward as an important element of the responsible AI framework and plan is, what does it even look like? What does responsible AI even look like? If we're looking at incentivizing safety, what does a responsible AI KPI look like in an organization? Because people also want practical, responsible AI implementation opportunities. So what is that in your opinion?
If you look at it from a safety point of view, right? So I mean, what is the cost of data loss, and what is the cost of creating legal, liability for yourself as an organization? What is the cost of losing customer because customer now no longer have trust? There was a story a couple of days back about Walmart and OpenAI, because Walmart introduced this agent with OpenAI that would interact with the consumer for their customer care, and it failed miserably. They had to pull it out, and Walmart reintroduced a different agent that developed by themselves because it was not doing the things it was supposed to do, also related to customer information privacy, right? So that is the act of governance because these are not being executed properly, and ability to pull out. That's what how you measure, because then if you're losing the customers, that's a real measurement, right? At the end of the day, you're in a business to make sure that customers are there. You can start measuring from that point of view. If you have employee loss, if you have customer loss, reputational loss, those are all indicators or measurement criteria of whether you're being responsible or not being responsible.
But that must as well adhere to the organizational values. Like, I don't think you can write a policy until you've defined your own organizational
Sure.
values, because ethics, they are the upstream source of every downstream rule. So
Right.
Walmart surely must have had something that would have supported that organizational value in the ethics. So do
Yeah,
you think it
actually,
was a misalignment with the, yeah, it's quite an
yeah, it's
interesting. I didn't
actually
hear about that one, so I need to read about it.
it's actually a dual effect in the sense that it's observation. One thing they did right, they were observing they didn't wait too long to figure out that they were going to have a problem. They're observing the effect of that agent that they deploy on the customer, and they pull the plug very quickly. You can do a historical and forensic analysis whether it worked or not when you're launching these type of things beyond lab. When it goes into actually in production, you're going to have to look at it very carefully, because let's not forget, we're collectively learning, right? So a lot of the things we think is going to work, it may not work. A lot of the things we think may not work actually work, in a much better way. So you have to kind of observe in your real life scenario how it works and how it doesn't work.
And I think that that's the most important element in understanding, like, how can you, as part of an organization and also as a leader, like, how can a leader tell if their team is just really checking a compliance box versus actually valuing ethical AI? Where would someone see red flags in an organization if they weren't compliant, or making sure that there was an accurate cultural diagnosis? Because as you said, we're all still in a learning journey. We're still all trying to understand what are the capabilities of the models. Where's the misalignment? Where's the intention from the purchaser in terms of working with a vendor, and also the leader in themselves of understanding how to mitigate and ensure that the AI is ethical? Like, what are the red flags?
Some of it is very fundamental and very basic. There's no replacement for integrity, trust, and being responsible for each other. So it all starts there. I did this post on LinkedIn about this article I wrote in Wall Street Journal in 2002, talking about the misalignment between the
Yes.
technology and business, right? And at that time, we were talking about, internet technology and information technology, blah, blah. You could easily replace that with AI, right? Because the lot of the basic element of misalignment, not having the same language, not having all the people with the same, page regarding the integrity and responsibility, those are very cultural issue. That was an element then, it is element now. Except now, because the vast majority of global population is so enabled with technology, unlike 2002,
Right.
and there is a much bigger effect. And also, let's not forget, never in our human history we have had any technology that has the potential to supersede our own intelligence, right? So there comes the responsibility, and there comes the deeper thinking, intentional role of a leader to make sure that collectively we are doing what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I think that the space is as well. I also saw on LinkedIn this morning that Richard Dawkins, so the man who built an entire career demanding rigorous evidence before accepting any extraordinary claims, he has just claimed himself that he's certain that Claude is conscious. He thinks that, the AI has reached a stage that he believes if these machines are not conscious, what could it possibly take to convince you that they are? Because it is so compelling, the answers that are provided. Even the world's most famous skeptics now are changing their mind in alignment with the development, as you say, of the systems and the way that we're interacting.
I've been saying this for the last 5 years, nonstop, every week, if not every day, right? There's huge opportunity. I'm super excited about all this. It could change healthcare. It could change how we learn. It can change how it drives your creativity. I know from my own daily work, right? I have never been more creative or more productive, but I also know how bad things can turn very quickly if we are not responsible about this, right? Do we all want to have a society where vast majority of the people doesn't have jobs? Do we want to have a society where handful of people has more power? Do you want to have a society where we are using these technology against each other? Do we want to have a society where we are become marginalized, and the divide between have and have not is getting bigger and bigger? I don't want that, and that's why you also see a lot of these thinkers and doers from all walks of life, from physicists to computer scientists to philosophers to business people are, waving red flag. We must contain this. Otherwise, we're going to be in deep trouble.
So I think that that's also part of the responsible AI framework. I mean, we can't have responsible AI that's not compatible with support and progression and job enablement. I
Yes.
mean, there's a lot of still fear, speculation around the fact that in 2026, 2027, there's a projection that there will still be massive AI related job losses. Now, is responsible AI actually compatible with mass layoffs, or is there a middle ground for human augmentation? I mean, where does that fit in?
Well, Lauren, you and I talked about this in multiple episodes of our podcast where we talked about that. Do you want augmentation or do you want automation and replacement? I am a firm believer we should not have replacement, we should have augmentation because at the end of the day, who are these technology for? It has to be for humanity. A jobless society is not fulfilling the purpose of humanity. We all need to do something. Even if we had money, you still need purpose to do something, to be productive, to add something, right? If you don't have that opportunity, if everything is done by something else, then you're obsolete. Why we are so busy trying to make ourselves obsolete completely? That doesn't make any sense.
But I think that in the long term, I think that slowly as we develop and not only looking at if no one wants to make themselves obsolete. And I also think in the development, we saw recently there was a state in China that has passed a bill that says that you're no longer allowed
Yeah.
to state that, you're eliminating this job because of AI. Because they can foresee that if jobs are eliminated, then this is not productive for society. If we look on the flip as well, I do think that as AI becomes integrated, you give the example of Walmart, transparency will be a competitive advantage. So companies
Absolutely.
will take it from an angle of, as consumers, everyone on the AI journey, they become more AI literate. They themselves will gravitate towards companies that can explain how and why their algorithms make decisions. that will be a core component, I think, as well, of responsible AI. Is this brought into the responsible AI framework?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the conversation about responsible AI is multi-tiered and multifaceted, right? There's organizational responsibility, there's individual responsibility, and there's the governmental responsibility to create the legal framework, like the one you talked about. I actually read the same thing yesterday or this morning. And, government will have to take a stance to protect their citizens because the role of the government is to create a infrastructure while the society in that particular country or community can thrive. That's what I think,
Yeah.
or at least I hope. There'll be a short-term reckoning where we're not going to pay any attention and we're going to create a complete mess, in next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And there'll be a reckoning, I hope, whereby we will back all this and create a more of a, this augmentation mentality, and governments and legal infrastructure steps in to pull it back versus just let it go wherever and we create a complete muck out of the whole global society.
I mean, there will be a reckoning. We see it as well. So, as you know, I live in Switzerland, live in Zurich, and the unemployment rate has been the highest in many years, actually. It's still incredibly low in comparison to other countries, but it is higher than normal. And one of the reasons when you actually talk to people that are looking for jobs in the job market, you have an influx of accessible portals that are driven by AI agents to apply for a job. So now talking to HR individuals or recruiters for one job, I even heard from someone that they got a rejection email because 30,000 people had applied for this job.
Yeah.
In return, there's multiple statements of transparency, which is good in the whole responsible AI movement, that AI will be used to analyze your application. This is happening. So unless there is a match with the sort of prompt that's been given for dismissal and acceptance, again, the likelihood of probably relatively well qualified individuals of even getting past the application phase is being minimized. And I do think that there is a visible and unnecessary chaos that is happening in that space alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, remember that article I wrote on Fast Company about, 20 seconds to decide whether somebody should live or die, and 16 seconds to decide whether somebody's healthcare should be approved or not. Those are all another set of example like the jobs, right? It's a pretty bad scenario no matter how you look at it.
Okay, so I think that my statement at the end of this conversation is that safety is a feature, it's not a bug. Responsible AI, it's not a handbrake on innovation. It's really the high performance braking system that does allow a car to go faster safely. So I'd certainly encourage everyone that's joined us in this conversation today or joined us on YouTube as part of the video episode, go to Fast Company and have a read of how to jumpstart your company's responsible AI governance in 90 days. This is part of our 90-day series, Faisal Hawk and myself, Lauren Hawker-Safar, and we hope that you come back soon and join us again on the next 90-day episode on Convergence. Thank you. Thank you, Faisal.
Thank you.
Do you want to add anything about your take on responsible AI?
No, I think that we said it enough. I mean, it's just one-liner could be that, the speed to launch is not the same as readiness to change, right? We want to move fast, but we want to make sure that we're not creating complete self-destruction in the process.
Exactly. Thank you.